I woke up in the dark. I couldn't feel my arms. I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't even feel the weight of the blanket resting over my chest. The only sensory input I had was sound. I heard the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of a ventilator. I heard the steady, agonizingly slow beep of a heart monitor. I heard the distinct squeak of rubber-soled shoes pacing on a linoleum floor. I tried to open my eyes. Nothing happened. The command traveled from my brain, but the muscles in my eyelids simply refused to respond. I tried to speak. I tried to scream. But there was a thick plastic tube shoved down my throat, forcing oxygen into my lungs. Panic, absolute and primal, surged through me. My heart monitor began to beep faster, the pitch rising sharply. Beep, 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 beep. Her heart rate is spiking again, a female voice said, sounding bored. It was a nurse. Is she waking up? A second voice asked. A voice I recognized immediately. It was my mother, Diana. No, Mrs. Knox, the nurse replied. It's just an autonomic neurological reflex. Her brainstem is still firing random electrical signals, but there's no higher cognitive function. She's in a profound vegetative state. The spinal swelling from the crash severed the motor pathways. I lay there, trapped inside the absolute darkness of my own skull. I remembered the crash. I was driving my Porsche down a steep, winding road in the Chicago suburbs. I had pressed the brake pedal to take a sharp turn, and the pedal had gone straight to the floor, completely limp. The last thing I saw was the heavy steel barrier rushing toward the windshield, followed by the sound of shattering glass. I wasn't brain dead. I was fully conscious. I was experiencing locked-in syndrome, a terrifying medical anomaly where the patient is completely paralyzed and unable to speak, but their cognitive function remains perfectly intact. I was buried alive inside my own body. So, what is the timeline? My mother asked. Her voice wasn't thick with grief. It was brisk, clinical, calculating. How long do we have to wait before we can legally determine that she isn't coming back? My heart monitor spiked again. My own mother wasn't asking for a miracle. She was asking for a deadline. That's a conversation for the chief neurologist, Mrs. Knox, the nurse said, her tone stiffening slightly. But usually, after 30 days with no improvement on the Glasgow Coma Scale, the family can discuss withdrawing life support. 30 days, my mother repeated, exhaling a long breath. Fine. I'll tell Caleb to start preparing the power of attorney paperwork. He needs to get control of her company before the board of directors realizes she's a vegetable. The door to the hospital room opened, followed by the heavy, familiar sound of my husband's expensive Italian leather shoes. Diana, Caleb said smoothly. How is she? The same. My mother sighed. The nurse said we have to wait 30 days before we can pull the plug. You need to call the lawyers, Caleb. Valerie's company is bleeding value every day she's lying here. If we don't transfer the executive equity soon, we'll lose millions. I'm handling it, Diana, Caleb assured her, his voice projecting the deep, masculine authority that had always charmed my family. I have the corporate attorneys drafting the durable power of attorney right now. Don't worry. I'll make sure you and Tessa are taken care of. See that you do, my mother said sharply. I'll go get some coffee. Tessa is in the hallway. I'll send her in. The heavy door opened and closed. My mother left. A moment later, lighter, softer footsteps entered the room. It was my younger sister, Tessa, the golden child, the sister who had always resented my success, my money, and my independence. Is she gone? Tessa whispered. Yeah, Diana went to the cafeteria, Caleb replied. Then, I heard something that made my blood run instantly, freezing cold. I heard the rustle of clothing. I heard a soft sigh. And I heard the unmistakable, wet sound of my husband and my sister kissing, right next to my hospital bed, less than 2 feet away from my paralyzed body. God, I hate this, Tessa murmured, pulling away. The smell of this hospital is making me sick. Are you sure she can't hear us? She's basically a corpse, Tessa, Caleb scoffed. The doctor said her brain is completely scrambled. She doesn't know anything. I hope so, Tessa sighed. Did you find the rest of the money? No, Caleb growled, his voice dropping into a dark, panicked register. That's the problem. I went through her home office safes. I went through the primary checking accounts. There's only about $50,000 in liquid cash. 50,000? Tessa asked, her voice rising in disbelief. Caleb, She's the founder of BlackVault Cyber Systems. The company was valued at $30 million last year. Where is the cash? Caleb hissed. She must have hidden it in offshore accounts or crypto wallets. She's paranoid about cybersecurity. But I need that money, Tessa. The offshore bookies are calling my office every day. I owe them $840,000. If I don't pay them by the end of the month, they are going to break my legs. I lay in the dark, my mind racing at light speed. Caleb wasn't the brilliant venture capitalist he pretended to be. He was a degenerate gambling addict. He had built up nearly $1 million in debt to organized crime, and he was desperately trying to use my assets to save his own life. Well, you better figure out how to access her accounts, Tessa said coldly, because you promised me we would go to Paris as soon as she was out of the picture. I know, baby, I know, Caleb soothed her. Just give me time. The mechanic said the brake line cut was totally clean. The police ruled it a tragic accident. Nobody suspects a thing. Once I get the power of attorney signed, I can leverage her company's assets to pay off the debt, and we'll be free. My heart monitor didn't spike this time. My heart seemed to stop completely. The brake line cut. My husband hadn't just cheated on me with my sister. He hadn't just plotted to steal my company. He had hired a mechanic to cut the brakes on my Porsche. He had actively, premeditatedly tried to murder me. I still can't believe she survived the crash, Tessa muttered, her voice tinged with genuine disappointment. She always was stubborn. It doesn't matter, Caleb said smoothly, running his hand over my paralyzed arm. I could feel the faint pressure of his touch, sending waves of pure revulsion through my nervous system. She's gone, Tessa. She's locked in that meat suit forever. We won. We just have to wait out the clock until we can pull the plug. They kissed one more time, and then they left the room. I was completely alone in the darkness. Caleb thought he had won. He thought he was brilliant, but he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He didn't know that 3 months before the crash, I had quietly sold a highly classified piece of intellectual property, the Aegis Sentinel Protocol, to a private defense contractor. I had sold it for $12 million. And because I was already deeply suspicious of Caleb's erratic behavior and secretive phone calls, I hadn't deposited that money into our joint accounts. I had deposited the entire $12 million into a heavily encrypted, decentralized digital trust. It was protected by biometric locks, multi-factor authentication, and a 24-word seed phrase that only I knew. Caleb was frantic over $50,000. Completely unaware that he was standing on top of a $12 million gold mine that he would never, ever be able to touch without my explicit, conscious consent. But having $12 million meant nothing if I was smothered with a pillow or taken off life support by a husband executing a fraudulent power of attorney. I needed to communicate. I needed an ally. For the next 48 hours, I focused every single ounce of my willpower, my rage, and my cognitive strength on my right eyelid. I am a cybersecurity architect. I spend my life finding vulnerabilities in highly secured systems and forcing entry. My body was currently a locked system. I just needed to find the back door. It was agonizing. It felt like trying to move a boulder with a single thread. But slowly, the neurological swelling in my spinal cord began to subside just a fraction of a millimeter. On the third night, at 2 a.m., the night nurse walked into my room. Her name was Mara. I had listened to her for 3 nights. She was a single mother, working double shifts to pay off nursing school loans. She was gentle when she turned my body to prevent bed sores, and unlike my family, she actually spoke to me as if I were a human being. "All right, Valerie," Mara whispered, adjusting the IV line in my arm. I focused all my rage on my right eye. Move, move, move. A tiny microscopic flutter rippled across my eyelid. Mara froze. Her hand stopped on my arm. "Valerie?" she whispered, leaning closer. I gathered my strength, fought through the exhaustion, and forced the muscle to contract. My right eye opened. Just a sliver. The bright, harsh fluorescent light of the hospital room burned my retina. But it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Mara gasped, stumbling backward, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God. You're in there. You're awake." She reached for the emergency call button above my bed. I closed my eye, then opened it twice in rapid succession. No, Mara stopped, her hand hovering over the red button. She was an ICU nurse. She knew what rapid blinking meant. She knew I was intentionally communicating. "You don't want me to call the doctor?" Mara asked, her voice trembling with shock. I blinked once. "Yes. Why?" Mara asked, leaning over me, her eyes wide. "Valerie, if you're conscious, they can start aggressive therapies. They can remove the ventilator. Why don't you want them to know?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't write. But my father had been an amateur radio operator. He had taught me Morse code when I was 10 years old. I began to blink, short and long flutters of my eyelid. DONOTTELLTHEM. Mara watched my eye, her lips moving silently as she translated the basic code. "Do not tell them," Mara whispered. "Your family?" I blinked once. I asked again. I blinked the next sequence slowly, deliberately, ensuring she caught every single letter. THEYTRIEDTOKILLME. Mara stared at me, the blood draining from her face. She looked at the door, then back at me. She realized exactly what she had just stumbled into. She wasn't just dealing with a medical miracle. She was dealing with an active, ongoing attempted murder. I can't, Mara stammered, terrified. I could lose my license. I could go to jail. I have a daughter, Valerie. If your husband finds out, I understood her fear, but I also knew her weakness. I had heard her crying on the phone in the hallway 2 nights ago, begging a collections agency for more time to pay her student loans. I began to blink again. IWILLPAYYOU. Mara hesitated. "Pay me? Valerie, your husband controls your accounts." ENCRYPTO. I blinked. BRINGTABLET. 10 minutes later, Mara snuck a personal iPad into the room. She held it above my face. The neurological swelling was continuing to recede. I couldn't move my arms or legs, but I found I could twitch the index finger of my right hand just enough to tap a screen if it was placed directly beneath it. Mara carefully positioned my hand over the iPad. It took me 20 agonizing minutes of microscopic finger twitches, but I managed to access a secondary, low-security crypto wallet I used for minor online transactions. I executed a transfer to the QR code Mara generated on her phone. A notification pinged on Mara's screen. Daples received. 250,000 USDC. Mara stared at her phone. $250,000. More money than she would make in 3 years of working double shifts. She looked down at me. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by the fierce, protective loyalty of a woman whose life had just been fundamentally changed. "What do you need me to do, boss?" Mara whispered. For the next week, I lived a double life. During the day, when Caleb, Tessa, and my mother visited, I was a brain-dead vegetable. I kept my eyes closed. I let my body go completely limp. I listened to them discuss my funeral arrangements, the sale of my company, and Caleb's mounting gambling debts. I listened to them plot the exact date they were going to ask the hospital ethics committee to withdraw my life support. But at night, when the ward was dark and Mara was on duty, the ghost woke up. Mara would prop the iPad in front of my face and place my right hand on the screen. My motor control was slowly returning to my upper extremities. I could now move my wrist and all 5 fingers. I didn't use the iPad to watch movies. I used it to hack into the smart home security system I had personally installed in the Westport house I shared with Caleb. Caleb thought he was a genius for cutting my brake lines, but he was a technological illiterate. He didn't know that the decorative smoke detectors in the living room, the kitchen, and his home office contained high-definition, audio-enabled hidden cameras that backed up to a secure cloud server only I could access. At 3:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, I accessed the live feed of my own living room. Caleb was sitting on the sofa, drinking a glass of scotch. Tessa was sitting on his lap, wearing a silk robe that belonged to me. "I'm nervous, Caleb," Tessa said, staring into the fireplace. "Julian has been asking questions about the accident. He asked me why the police didn't run a full forensic analysis on the car." My heart jumped. Julian Cross was Tessa's husband. He was a forensic CPA, a brilliant, methodical accountant who hated Caleb's flashy arrogance. "Julian is a glorified calculator," Caleb scoffed, taking a sip of his scotch. "He doesn't know anything. The mechanic I hired in Cicero wiped the undercarriage." The brake lines look like they snapped from tension. "Stop worrying. I can't help it," Tessa said. "If Julian finds out I'm sleeping with you, he'll divorce me. And if he finds out we planned the crash, he'll go straight to the FBI." I tapped the screen, saving the video file directly to the encrypted iPad. I had the confession. I had the undeniable, crystal clear proof of conspiracy to commit murder. I could have sent it to the police right then. I could have had Caleb arrested in his bathrobe. But I didn't want him to just go to jail. I wanted to burn his entire world to the ground. I wanted him to lose the company, the money, the reputation, and his freedom, all in a single devastating moment of absolute public humiliation. I needed an ally on the outside, someone with access to federal authorities, financial records, and Caleb's daily life. I opened an encrypted email client on the iPad. I attached the video file of Caleb and Tessa discussing the brake lines. I typed in Julian Cross's email address. In the subject line, I wrote, "Your wife is sleeping with my husband. And they tried to kill me." I hit send. The ghost had officially entered the machine. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., the door to my hospital room opened. It wasn't Caleb. It wasn't my mother. It was Julian Cross. Julian was a tall, methodical man with sharp eyes and the exhausted posture of someone who spent 80 hours a week auditing corporate ledgers. He was a senior forensic CPA at a massive accounting firm in downtown Chicago. Tessa had married him 5 years ago because he was stable and wealthy, but she constantly complained that he was boring. He didn't look boring right now. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Julian locked the hospital door behind him, closed the blinds, and walked slowly toward my bed. "Valerie," Julian whispered, his voice trembling slightly. He looked down at me, his eyes scanning the tubes, the ventilator, and the heart monitor. "If you can hear me, if you sent that email, blink twice." I looked at him. I focused on my right eyelid. Blink. Blink. Julian exhaled a sharp, shaky breath, dragging a hand across his face. He pulled up a chair and sat down close to the bed, out of view of the hallway window. "I watched the video," Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, fierce whisper. "I watched it 10 times. I saw my wife sitting on Caleb's lap. I heard them talking about the mechanic in Cicero. I heard them talking about the brake lines." He looked at me, a profound, chilling anger settling over his features. "I went to the police precinct at 4 in the morning. Julian continued. "I was going to give them the video, but I stopped because I realized something. If I go to the local police, Caleb will hire a shark defense attorney. He'll claim the video is a deepfake. He'll claim the audio is manipulated. He'll drag it out in court. And in the meantime, he'll still have legal control over your medical care. He'll just ask the ethics committee to pull your plug before the trial starts." He leaned closer. "We need a federal case, Valerie," Julian said clinically. "Attempted murder is a state charge. But wire fraud, bank fraud, and the intricate transfer of stolen funds, that falls under the jurisdiction of the FBI. If we can prove Caleb is using fraudulent documents to access your corporate assets, the feds will seize everything. He won't have a dime for a lawyer, and he won't have the authority to make your medical decisions." I twitched my index finger on the blanket, Julian noticed. "You can move your hand," he asked, surprised. "Blink. What do you need me to do?" Julian asked. I couldn't speak, but Mara, the night nurse, had left a printed alphabet board under my pillow. Julian found it and held it up. He pointed to the letters, and I blinked when he reached the one I wanted. It was slow, agonizing work, but Julian was an auditor. Patience was his profession. "TRACEDEBT Caleb's gambling debt?" Julian asked. "Blink. I can do that," Julian nodded. "I have access to forensic software that can track offshore crypto wallets and wire transfers. I'll find exactly who he owes the $840,000 to. WAITFORPOA, the power of attorney." Julian frowned. "You want him to execute it. Valerie, if he gets a durable POA, he can legally sell your company." I spelled out my response. "FORGERYIS, FRAUD." Julian stared at me, the brilliant, ruthless logic of my plan clicking into place. "If he forces you to sign it while you're incapacitated, it's a forged document. Every single financial transaction he makes using that document becomes a federal crime." Blink, You're letting him dig his own grave, Julian whispered, a dark smile crossing his face. All right, Valerie, I'm in. Let's let them spend some money. 2 days later, Caleb walked into my hospital room. He wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a man in a cheap suit carrying a leather briefcase. Are you sure about this, Caleb? The man asked nervously, looking at my motionless body. The notary commission is very strict about competency. If she's brain dead, I can't notarize the signature. She's not brain dead, Marcus. Caleb lied smoothly. The doctor said she has intermittent periods of lucidity. She knows exactly what she's doing. The company needs this transfer to survive. Just get the stamp ready. Caleb walked up to the bed. He pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his jacket. It was a durable general power of attorney, granting Caleb Rourke absolute, uncontested control over all my personal assets, bank accounts, healthcare directives, and executive voting rights at BlackVault Cyber Systems. Valerie, honey, Caleb said loudly, pretending to be a loving husband for the benefit of the corrupt notary. I need you to sign these papers so I can pay your medical bills, okay? He reached under the blanket and pulled out my right hand. I could move my hand now. I had regained enough motor control to grip a pen and write my name clearly, but I didn't. Caleb pressed a ballpoint pen into my palm. He wrapped his hand tightly around mine, physically forcing my fingers to close around the plastic barrel. Just a little scribble, honey, Caleb whispered, his grip painfully tight. He forced my hand down onto the signature line. I fought him. Not with strength, but with deliberate, calculated weakness. I let my hand go completely limp, forcing him to drag the pen across the paper. I intentionally twitched my wrist in random directions, fighting against his guiding hand. The resulting signature looked nothing like my elegant, fluid handwriting. It was a chaotic, jagged, broken scrawl. It looked exactly like what it was, the forced signature of an incapacitated victim. There, Caleb said, sweating slightly as he pulled the pen away. She signed it. The notary looked at the jagged mess of ink. He knew it was highly illegal. But Caleb handed him an envelope thick with cash, and the notary pulled out his stamp. Thud. The seal was applied. Caleb Rourke officially had the keys to my kingdom. He didn't waste a single second. Over the next 2 weeks, Julian Cross sat in his downtown office, watching a live dashboard he had secretly linked to my accounts, documenting every single move Caleb made. Caleb moved fast, and he moved aggressively. Using the fraudulent POA, he walked into a massive commercial bank in Chicago and took out a second mortgage on our $5 million Westport estate. He pulled out $2 million in cash. Bank fraud, wire fraud, title fraud. Julian logged it all into an encrypted FBI dossier. Caleb wired $400,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands to pay off half of his gambling debt. Money laundering. Interstate transfer of illicit funds. Julian tracked the IP addresses and added them to the file. But Caleb wasn't the only one spending my money. My family was feasting on the carcass they thought I had left behind. Tessa used a corporate credit card. Caleb gave her to go on a massive shopping spree on Michigan Avenue. She bought $30,000 worth of designer bags, shoes, and jewelry. My mother, Diana, used the POA to transfer $100,000 into her own personal checking account, claiming it was for emotional distress and travel expenses. 2 days later, she booked a month-long, first-class vacation to the French Riviera for her and Tessa. They are literally spending their way into federal prison. Julian told me one night, standing by my hospital bed while Mara kept watch at the door. Caleb has committed at least 7 distinct federal felonies in the last 14 days. I have the wire receipts. I have the IP logs. The FBI is going to absolutely bury him. What about the $12 million? I blinked. Julian smirked. That's the best part. He's panicking. The $2 million he took from the mortgage is already gone, spent on the bookies, the shopping, and his new Ferrari. He was digging through your home office and found a tax document referencing the sale of the Aegis protocol. He knows there's a massive payout somewhere, but he can't find the accounts. I closed my eyes, formulating the next move. Caleb was greedy, but he was also desperate. He owed the bookies another $400,000, and they didn't care about his new Ferrari. He needed the Aegis money, and since he couldn't find it himself, he would do what he always did. He would hire someone else to do the work. I signaled Mara to bring the iPad. HONEYPOT. I spelled out for Julian. A honeypot? Julian asked. You want to set a trap for a hacker? Blink that night, lying perfectly still in my hospital bed, listening to the rhythmic hiss of my ventilator. I built a digital execution chamber. I logged into a secure, isolated cloud server that belonged to BlackVault. I created a fake, highly encrypted directory. Inside that directory, I placed a single file. I named the file *Aegis Sentinel Trust Pot D Ask. It wasn't a PDF. It was an executable payload. It was a reverse shell Trojan, custom coded by me, designed to instantly bypass basic antivirus software, silently install itself on the host computer, and grant me total, undetected administrative access to the attacker's machine. I left the directory just vulnerable enough to be breached by a mid-level hacker, but complex enough to make them feel like they had accomplished something brilliant. 3 days later, the trap snapped shut. At 1:30 a.m., my iPad pinged. Someone had breached the honeypot server. I watched the server logs as the intruder navigated the fake directory. I watched them locate the PDF file. I watched them initiate the download. Payload executed. A massive, satisfied smile spread across my mind, even if my physical face remained perfectly blank. I didn't just have their IP address. I had their entire computer. I opened the remote access terminal on my iPad. I was looking directly at the desktop of Caleb's personal MacBook Pro, sitting on the desk in his home office in Westport. He had hired a black hat hacker to crack my servers, and the idiot had run the payload directly on Caleb's machine. I began to dig. I didn't care about the gambling debts anymore. Julian had already documented that. I was looking for the Holy Grail. I was looking for the receipt for my murder. It took me 3 hours of combing through Caleb's deleted files, his encrypted messaging apps, and his crypto wallet histories. At 4:11 a.m., I found it. It was an archived conversation on a secure messaging app called Signal. The contact was saved as C. Cicero. Caleb, Cicero. Brake lines are cleanly severed. Fluid will drain completely after 5 miles of driving. It will look like a pressure failure. Caleb, transferring the rest of the Bitcoin now. If the cops ask, you were never at the house. C. Cicero. I don't know you. You don't know me. Attached to the chat log was a transaction hash for a Bitcoin transfer equivalent to $20,000, sent from Caleb's hidden crypto wallet exactly 12 hours before my crash. It was the digital murder receipt. I didn't just have proof of fraud. I had irrefutable, federal-level evidence of a murder-for-hire conspiracy, paid for across state lines using cryptocurrency. I downloaded the entire chat log, the transaction hashes, and the forensic metadata proving the messages originated from Caleb's MacBook. I encrypted the file and emailed it directly to Julian Cross. The next afternoon, my mother, Diana, walked into my hospital room. She was wearing a brand new Chanel jacket, purchased with the money she had stolen from my accounts. She looked fantastic. She looked wealthy, rested, and entirely unbothered by the fact that her eldest daughter was lying motionless in a hospital bed. She walked over to the bed and looked down at me. Well, Valerie, Diana sighed, checking her reflection in the small mirror above the sink. I suppose this is goodbye for a while. Tessa and I are leaving for the Riviera tomorrow. We both need a break from the stress of this tragedy. She walked closer, leaning over my face. You always were so difficult, Valerie, Diana whispered, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. Always working. Always thinking you were better than everyone else because you had money. Well, look at you now, a vegetable. She reached down and picked up my left hand. I felt her cold fingers slide over my knuckles. She grasped the massive, flawless 3-carat diamond engagement ring I had bought for myself years ago, which Caleb had claimed he bought for me. She twisted it roughly, pulling it off my paralyzed finger. You won't be needing this where you're going, Diana said, dropping the ring into her designer purse. When Caleb sells the company, we're going to move you to a state-run nursing facility. It's too expensive to keep you in this private ICU. Don't worry, I'm sure the nurses there will be fine. She patted my arm, turned around, and walked out of the room. She didn't know that the iPad, tucked beneath my pillow, had recorded the entire interaction, including the audio of her admitting she was going to dump me in a substandard facility to save money, while stealing my jewelry. That evening, Caleb arrived. He had a massive, triumphant smile on his face. He walked over to the bed and kissed my forehead. "Good news, honey," Caleb whispered, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "I'm taking you home." I didn't understand. Why would he take me home if they were planning to dump me in a state facility? "I'm hosting a charity gala at the house next week," Caleb continued, answering my unspoken question. "The Valerie Recovery Foundation. I've invited the entire board of directors from BlackVault, major tech investors, and the press. I'm going to bring you out in your wheelchair, look like the tragic, devoted husband, and officially announce that I am taking over the CEO position permanently to honor your legacy." He patted my cheek. "It's going to be the event of the season, Val," he smiled. "Everyone is going to applaud me." I lay perfectly still in the dark. Caleb thought he was organizing his coronation. He thought he was going to stand on a stage, surrounded by wealth and power, and officially claim his stolen empire. He didn't know that he was building his own gallows. And he didn't know that the woman he was rolling onto the stage was going to be the one to pull the lever. 2 days before the gala, I was transferred from the private ICU via a medical transport van and rolled into the primary living room of the Westport estate. Caleb had spared no expense in setting the stage. He had rented a specialized medical bed, positioned perfectly in the center of the room, so I could be prominently displayed like a tragic, helpless prop. He had hired a team of private, in-home nurses to manage my care. But I had made sure Julian handled the staffing contracts. And Julian made sure Mara was the head nurse assigned to my primary care. During the day, I maintained the absolute illusion of the locked-in syndrome. I lay perfectly still, my eyes tracking lazily across the ceiling, my body completely unresponsive as Caleb brought catering directors and event planners into the house to discuss the menu for the Valerie Recovery Foundation gala. But at night, when the house was completely silent and Caleb was asleep upstairs with Tessa, the medical bed became a rehabilitation center. With Mara guarding the door and helping support my weight, I began the excruciating process of reclaiming my physical autonomy. The first night, I simply sat up on the edge of the bed. It felt like my spine was made of shattered glass, but the motor pathways were fully reconnected. The swelling was gone. The second night, I stood up. My legs shook violently, the muscles atrophied from a month of disuse, but Mara held my arms, keeping me steady. By the third night, I was walking. I paced the length of the living room in the dark, rebuilding my stamina, testing my balance, and mentally rehearsing the absolute destruction I was about to unleash. "You're ready," Mara whispered on the final night, watching me walk across the room without any assistance. "You look strong, boss." "I am strong, Mara," I replied softly, my vocal cords finally producing clear, steady speech. "Are the clothes hidden in the caterer's prep room?" "Yes." Mara nodded. "Julian snuck the garment bag in with the audiovisual equipment this morning. The crimson suit is hanging in the back closet. The iPad is connected to the primary projector's wireless receiver and Julian's guests." I asked. "Confirmed," Mara smiled. "He registered 6 guests under the accounting firm's corporate table. 3 of them are special agents from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. 2 are regulators from the SEC. They think they are here for a routine corporate compliance dinner." "They're about to get dinner and a show," I said, walking back to the medical bed and carefully lying down, returning my body to its rigid, paralyzed state. The next evening, the Westport estate was transformed into a glittering, high-society ballroom. Caleb had hired a massive white tent for the back lawn, complete with crystal chandeliers, a string quartet, and an open bar pouring $200 champagne. At 7 p.m., the guests began to arrive. There were over 200 people in attendance. The board of directors from BlackVault Cyber Systems, major tech investors from Silicon Valley, local politicians who Caleb wanted to impress, and seated quietly, at a table near the back, 6 men in unassuming dark suits who didn't touch their champagne. At 7:30 p.m., Caleb rolled my wheelchair out of the house and into the main tent. I was wearing a simple, pale hospital gown with a light blanket draped over my lap. My head lolled slightly to the side. I kept my eyes unfocused, staring blankly ahead. A collective murmur of pity swept through the crowd. Women put their hands over their mouths. Men shook their heads sadly. Caleb played his role flawlessly. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his face arranged into a mask of stoic, heartbroken devotion. He leaned down, kissed the top of my head, and gently patted my shoulder. "Thank you all for being here," Caleb said, greeting the board members as he wheeled me toward a prominent position near the front stage. It means the world to Valerie to be surrounded by the people she loves. Tessa was standing near the front row, wearing a stunning black evening gown purchased with my stolen money. She wiped a fake tear from her eye as I was rolled past. My mother, Diana, was seated at the VIP table, wearing her new Chanel jacket and holding a glass of champagne, looking completely bored by the entire spectacle. Julian was standing near the audiovisual booth at the back of the tent. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second and gave a microscopic nod. The trap was fully set. At 8 p.m., the string quartet stopped playing. Caleb walked up the steps to the main stage. He tapped the microphone, the sharp feedback cutting through the ambient chatter of the crowd. The tent fell completely silent. Behind Caleb, a massive high-definition projection screen displayed the logo of the newly formed Valerie Recovery Foundation. "Good evening," Caleb began, his voice thick with perfectly calibrated emotion. "When I look out at all of you tonight, I don't just see investors or board members or colleagues. I see a family that has rallied around my beautiful wife in her darkest hour." He paused, looking down at me in the wheelchair. I stared blankly at the tablecloth. "As many of you know, the accident left Valerie in a profound state of unresponsiveness," Caleb continued, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. "The doctors have told us that her condition is permanent. The brilliant, visionary woman who founded BlackVault Cyber Systems she's gone." The crowd let out a soft, sympathetic sigh. "But her legacy cannot die," Caleb proclaimed, his voice rising with heroic determination. "BlackVault is more than just a company. It is Valerie's dream. And I cannot let that dream fade away while she lies here, unable to speak for herself." He looked directly at the board of directors seated in the front row. "That is why, effective immediately, utilizing the durable power of attorney Valerie granted me, I am stepping in as the permanent chief executive officer of BlackVault Cyber Systems," Caleb announced. "I will protect her company. I will protect her assets. And I will ensure that this foundation funds neurological research so that no husband ever has to watch the woman he loves slip away into the dark." The crowd erupted into applause. It was a standing ovation. People were clapping, raising their glasses, and cheering for the devoted, self-sacrificing husband. While the crowd was distracted by the applause, Mara quietly unhooked the brake on my wheelchair and quickly rolled me out the side exit of the tent, pushing me into the caterer's prep room attached to the main house. "You have 2 minutes," Mara whispered urgently, pulling the crimson power suit from the garment bag. I didn't hesitate. I stood up from the wheelchair, shedding the pathetic hospital gown and the blanket. I stepped into the sharp, tailored crimson suit. I slid my feet into a pair of black stilettos. I pulled my hair back into a tight, authoritative bun. I looked in the small mirror leaning against the prep room wall. The paralyzed, brain-dead victim was gone. The founder of BlackVault Cyber Systems had returned. "Are you ready?" Mara asked, handing me the iPad. "Cut the lights," I said. In the main tent, Caleb was still standing at the microphone, basking in the applause of the crowd, waiting for the noise to die down so he could propose a toast. Suddenly, the massive crystal chandeliers went completely dark. The string quartet gasped in surprise. The crowd murmured in confusion, the applause dying out entirely. "Stay calm, everyone," Caleb's voice echoed through the microphone. "Just a minor power surge. The backup generators will kick in momentarily." The backup generators didn't kick in. Instead, the massive projection screen behind Caleb flickered to life. The logo of the Valerie Recovery Foundation vanished. It was replaced by a live video feed of my mother, Diana, standing in my hospital room. The audio fed directly into the massive concert speakers surrounding the tent. "You won't be needing this where you're going." My mother's voice boomed through the silent ballroom, clear and cruel. On the screen, the 200 VIP guests watched in absolute stunned silence as Diana ripped the 3-carat diamond ring off my paralyzed finger. "When Caleb sells the company, we're going to move you to a state-run nursing facility. It's too expensive to keep you in this private ICU." A collective gasp of sheer horror ripped through the crowd. Diana dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the floor, but nobody looked at her. Every single eye in the tent was glued to the screen. Caleb spun around, staring at the projection screen, his face draining of all color. "Turn it off," Caleb yelled, panicking, looking toward the audiovisual booth. "Cut the feed. Cut the feed now." Julian Cross was standing in the booth. He just smiled, crossed his arms, and leaned against the wall. The screen flickered again. This time, it wasn't my mother. It was security footage from the hidden camera in my living room. It was Caleb and Tessa sitting on the sofa. Tessa was wearing my silk robe. "I'm nervous, Caleb." Tessa's voice echoed across the lawn. "If Julian finds out I'm sleeping with you, he'll divorce me. And if he finds out we planned the crash, he'll go straight to the FBI." The silence in the tent was absolute, the kind of silence that happens right before a bomb detonates. "The mechanic I hired in Cicero wiped the undercarriage," Caleb's voice boasted through the speakers. "The brake lines look like they snapped from tension. Stop worrying." Tessa screamed. She covered her face with her hands, dropping to her knees near the front row, trying to hide from the terrified, disgusted stares of the investors and politicians standing around her. Caleb staggered backward on the stage, dropping the microphone. He looked like a man who had just been shot in the chest. His meticulously crafted illusion was disintegrating in real time, broadcast in high definition to the very people he was trying to impress. "It's a fake!" Caleb screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "It's a deep fake. Someone hacked the servers. It's not real." Then, a single, sharp spotlight clicked on. It didn't hit the stage. It hit the center aisle of the tent, cutting a brilliant, blinding path through the darkness. The crowd parted instantly, backing away from the light. I stepped into the spotlight. I was wearing the crimson suit. I wasn't in a wheelchair. I wasn't hooked to a ventilator. I was standing tall, my posture perfect, my eyes locked directly onto the pathetic, trembling man on the stage. The crowd went completely, deathly silent. I walked down the center aisle. The sharp click, click, click of my stilettos echoed through the tent, louder than a gunshot in the silent room. I stopped at the foot of the stage. I looked at Tessa sobbing on the floor. I looked at my mother frozen in terror at the VIP table. And then I looked up at Caleb. "It's not a deepfake, Caleb," I said, my voice cold, powerful, and amplified perfectly through the silent tent. Caleb stared at me, his eyes wide, his jaw slacked in absolute disbelief. He looked like he was staring at a corpse that had just crawled out of its grave. "Valerie?" Caleb whispered, his voice shaking so violently it was barely audible. You're walking, you're awake." "I was never asleep," I replied, my voice echoing like a death sentence. "I was paralyzed. But I heard every single word you said. I heard you complain about your gambling debts. I heard you forge my signature. And I heard you kiss my sister while plotting my funeral." I tapped the screen of the iPad in my hand. The massive projection screen shifted again. This time, it displayed a massive, scrolling spreadsheet. "For the last 3 weeks," I announced to the crowd, turning to face the board of directors and the silent, observing men in the dark suits at the back, "Caleb Rourke has been utilizing a fraudulently obtained power of attorney, signed under coercion, while I was medically incapacitated, to execute massive financial crimes." I pointed to the screen. $2 million in mortgage fraud on this very estate, I listed cleanly, ruthlessly. $400,000 in wire fraud to offshore sportsbooks. $30,000 in credit card fraud executed by Tessa Knox, and a $100,000 embezzlement executed by Diana Knox. My mother let out a sharp, pathetic whimper, trying to hide behind the VIP table. Caleb took a step back on the stage, looking desperately toward the exit. Valerie, please. You don't understand. The bookies were going to kill me. I had to do it. And what about my murder? I asked softly, tapping the iPad one final time. The screen shifted to the Bitcoin transaction hash and the encrypted signal chat. Is it done? The text on the massive screen read. Break lines are cleanly severed. That is a murder-for-hire receipt, Caleb, I stated, staring directly into his terrified eyes. Paid across state lines using a decentralized crypto wallet. It is undeniable, irrefutable proof of attempted murder. The crowd began to step back from Caleb, creating a massive, isolating void around the stage. They were no longer looking at a grieving husband. They were looking at a monster. Caleb was hyperventilating. He looked at the screen, then at the crowd, and finally his eyes locked onto me. I couldn't find the money, Valerie, Caleb screamed, completely abandoning any pretense of innocence, breaking under the sheer, crushing weight of his failure. You hid the company's liquid assets. I couldn't find the $12 million from the Aegis protocol. I had no choice. I smiled, a slow, chilling smile. I didn't hide the company's assets, Caleb, I corrected him softly. I hid my personal assets. The $12 million is sitting in an encrypted trust that you could never, ever access. You sold your soul, you committed federal fraud, and you tried to murder your wife for $50,000. Caleb fell to his knees on the stage. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't just failed to steal an empire, he had destroyed his entire life, guaranteed himself decades in federal prison, and became the most hated man in Chicago, all while chasing a treasure chest that he didn't even have the key to. He put his head in his hands and began to sob. From the back of the tent, the 6 men in the dark suits finally moved. Caleb Rourke, a booming, authoritative voice shouted. The FBI agents pushed through the crowd, their badges flashing in the ambient light, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder across state lines, the lead agent announced, marching up the steps to the stage. Caleb didn't fight. He just knelt there, completely broken, as the agent grabbed his arms, wrenched them behind his back, and clamped heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. 2 other agents moved into the crowd. They grabbed Tessa by the arms, dragging her off the floor, ignoring her hysterical screaming. They walked to the VIP table, forcing my mother to stand up, cuffing her hands behind her back while she wept, begging them not to ruin her Chanel jacket. The flashing red and blue lights of local police cruisers began to reflect off the walls of the white tent, illuminating the absolute devastation of the Knox family. I stood in the center of the aisle, watching as my husband, my sister, and my mother were perp-walked out of the glamorous charity gala they had thrown to celebrate my death. They thought I was buried. I was just waiting for the right audience. The media fallout from the charity gala was immediate, catastrophic, and completely inescapable. Within 24 hours, the video of Caleb's arrest was playing on every major news network in the country. The story of the brain-dead CEO, who secretly woke up, recorded her own murder plot, and orchestrated a federal raid at her own recovery gala, became an international sensation. The federal prosecutors didn't even have to try very hard. Julian's meticulously assembled dossier provided an airtight, unbreakable paper trail for the financial crimes. The forged power of attorney, the fraudulent $2 million mortgage, the offshore wire transfers, and the exorbitant credit card purchases were all documented with terrifying precision. And then there was the digital murder receipt. The FBI Cyber Division traced the Bitcoin transaction directly from Caleb's laptop to the mechanic in Cicero. Confronted with the digital evidence, the blockchain ledgers, and the prospect of a life sentence, the mechanic folded immediately. He flipped on Caleb, signing a full confession detailing exactly how much he was paid, where the meeting took place, and exactly how he had severed the brake lines on my Porsche to ensure it looked like a catastrophic pressure failure. Caleb Rourke didn't stand a chance. His high-priced defense attorney took one look at the evidence, watched the video of Caleb and Tessa confessing on my living room sofa, and strongly advised his client to take a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. or a true life sentence. 3 months after the gala, the sentencing was handed down in a packed federal courtroom in downtown Chicago. Caleb, looking gaunt, pale, and completely stripped of his arrogant charm, was sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for conspiracy to commit murder, massive wire fraud, and bank fraud. He wept openly when the judge read the sentence. My sister Tessa, who had spent the entire trial crying hysterically and claiming she was manipulated by Caleb, was convicted as an accessory before the fact and found guilty of massive credit card fraud. The judge showed no leniency for her tears. She received a 10-year sentence in a federal women's correctional facility. My mother, Diana, who had stolen $100,000 while I lay paralyzed in a hospital bed and planned to dump me in a substandard nursing home to save money, was sentenced to 5 years for embezzlement and severe elder-dependent abuse. They were all led out of the courtroom in heavy steel handcuffs. I sat in the front row, wearing my crimson power suit, completely dry-eyed, watching them go. The family that had plotted my death was entirely eradicated from society in a single afternoon. 6 months after the sentencing, I drove out to the federal penitentiary in Indiana. It was a cold, gray afternoon. The prison was a bleak, terrifying concrete fortress, surrounded by double rows of razor wire, floodlights, and armed guard towers. It was a place designed to crush the human spirit. I was escorted by a guard into a sterile, heavily monitored visitation room. A thick, smudged panel of bulletproof glass divided the room in half. There were no chairs on my side. I stood, waiting in the silence. A heavy steel door buzzed open on the other side of the glass. Caleb walked in. He was wearing an oversized khaki jumpsuit that hung loosely on his shrinking frame. His hair was buzzing short, and the deep, arrogant tan he used to maintain had completely faded into a sickly institutional pallor. He looked 10 years older. The swagger, the confidence, the illusion of power. It was all gone, crushed under the immense, inescapable weight of the federal prison system. He sat down on a bolted metal stool and picked up the heavy black telephone receiver on his side of the glass. I picked up mine. "Valerie," Caleb said, his voice raspy, weak, and broken. He didn't look me in the eye. He stared down at the scratched metal counter between us. "I didn't think you would ever come here." "I'm not here for a social visit, Caleb," I replied, my voice calm, perfectly level, and entirely devoid of emotion. I was looking at a ghost. I slid a single, thick manila envelope through the narrow metal slot at the bottom of the bulletproof glass partition. Caleb looked at the envelope, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled it through. He opened it and stared at the documents inside. They were the final, irrevocable divorce papers. "Julian's forensic audit recovered every single dollar you stole," I explained clinically, watching his eyes scan the pages. "The $2 million mortgage has been nullified due to fraud. The $400,000 you wired offshore was seized by federal authorities. The bank took back the Ferrari. You have absolutely no remaining assets. The court has awarded me everything." Caleb stared at the divorce papers. The reality of his absolute zero net worth, combined with his 25-year sentence, was printed in black and white. "Sign them, Caleb," I ordered. He didn't argue. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He knew it was over. He picked up a cheap plastic pen attached to the wall by a metal chain and signed his name, officially ending our marriage and relinquishing any microscopic claim he thought he might still have had to my life. He slid the papers back through the slot. "I just wanted the money, Val," Caleb whispered, finally looking up at me, his eyes filled with a pathetic, hollow regret and absolute despair. I owed so much to the bookies. They were going to hurt me. I was terrified. I just wanted the money so I could breathe. I looked at the man who had hired a mechanic to kill me. "You didn't want the money, Caleb," I corrected him softly. "You wanted the power that the money represented. You wanted to feel like a visionary, but you were too lazy and too incompetent to build anything yourself. So you decided to steal my empire instead of asking for my help." I folded the signed divorce papers and slipped them safely into my briefcase. "And the tragic irony, Caleb," I added, stepping away from the glass, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the sterile room like a scalpel. is that if you had just been honest with me, if you had just admitted you had a gambling problem, I would have paid the $800,000 to save your life. It would have been a fraction of my trust fund. Caleb's eyes widened in sheer, agonizing realization. He stopped breathing. He had destroyed his entire life, sent himself to a maximum security prison for 25 years, and ruined my family for a debt I could have eliminated with a single wire transfer from my phone. Enjoy the next 25 years, I said. I hung up the phone. I didn't look back as I walked out of the visitation room, leaving Caleb trapped behind the glass, screaming silently into the receiver as the guards moved in to take him back to his cell. 2 years later, my life was completely unrecognizable from the nightmare of the hospital bed. BlackVault Cyber Systems had not only survived the scandal, it had thrived. The immense publicity from the gala, combined with the irrefutable, terrifying proof of my cybersecurity prowess, had driven our corporate valuation through the roof. We were now a $90 million enterprise, securing massive security contracts with the Department of Defense and major international financial institutions. I wasn't doing it alone. Julian Cross, the brilliant forensic CPA who had helped me dismantle Caleb's financial crimes, had finalized his divorce from Tessa while she was rotting in prison. He had quit his exhausting, soul-crushing job at the downtown firm and accepted my offer to become the chief financial officer of BlackVault. We made a terrifyingly effective executive team. And Mara, the brave night nurse who had risked her license and her career to keep my secret, didn't have to work double shifts anymore. I had offered her a newly created position as the Director of Health and Wellness for BlackVault's massive corporate campus. It came with a huge salary, full premium benefits, and regular daytime hours, so she could finally spend evenings and weekends with her young daughter. We were a family forged in the fire of betrayal, bound by absolute loyalty and unbreakable trust. One quiet Friday evening, after the massive corporate office had emptied out for the weekend, I sat alone in my executive suite on the top floor of the BlackVault Tower in Chicago. The city lights sparkled brilliantly outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. I poured myself a glass of expensive bourbon, walked over to my heavy oak desk, and opened my primary laptop. I bypassed the biometric fingerprint locks, entered the multi-factor authentication codes from an offline device, and typed in the complex 24-word seed phrase that only existed in my memory. The screen unlocked. The dashboard of the encrypted digital trust loaded cleanly. Current balance, $14,250,000. The $12 million from the Aegis Sentinel protocol had grown significantly through conservative, automated investments. I looked at the number. I thought about Caleb, desperately tearing apart my home office, panicking over $50,000, while this massive fortune sat hidden behind a wall of code he could never, ever comprehend. I thought about my mother, stealing a diamond ring off the finger of a woman she thought was brain dead. I thought about Tessa, buying designer bags with fraudulent credit cards, thinking she had finally won the jackpot. They had all believed that my power came from my physical ability to fight back. They thought that because I was paralyzed, because I was silent, because I appeared helpless in a hospital bed, I was completely defeated. They didn't understand that true power doesn't reside in the muscles. It resides in the mind. It resides in the quiet, terrifying ability to observe, to calculate, and to strike when the enemy believes they are entirely safe and victorious. I took a sip of the bourbon, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. My body had fully recovered. The scars from the crash had faded into pale white lines. But the lesson I learned while trapped in the terrifying darkness of the locked-in syndrome would remain with me for the rest of my life. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never assume that silence is surrender. And never, ever try to steal a cybersecurity empire from the woman who writes the source code. I closed the laptop, the screen going dark, and walked out of the office, ready to enjoy the weekend. So tell me honestly, if you woke up paralyzed and heard your own family confessing to your attempted murder while plotting to steal your fortune, would you alert the doctors and demand immediate police protection? Or would you play dead, gather the evidence, and let them throw a party to celebrate your demise before locking them all in federal prison? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.